Lucius Verus, a figure sometimes unfairly underestimated in the annals of the Roman Empire, often appears to posterity as a frivolous playboy and an insatiable lover of lavish feasts. Historical sources, written years after his death, display remarkable hostility towards him, and many modern scholars are inclined to dismiss him outright, viewing him merely as a pale shadow of his far more celebrated adoptive brother, Marcus Aurelius. However, despite this seemingly unambiguous reputation, behind the facade of carefree living lay a man capable of outstanding achievements. It was Verus who successfully led a large-scale campaign against one of Rome's most powerful and long-standing rivals in the East, the formidable Parthian Empire. The history of this emperor begins with his birth on December 15, 130 AD, in the very heart of the Eternal City, Rome. He was born Lucius Ionius Commodus, his roots deeply embedded in a noble consular family on his father's side, whose history could be traced back to his great-grandfather, underscoring the ancient and influential standing of their gens within the Roman patriciate. His mother, Avidia Placia, also boasted noble lineage. It is highly probable that she was a descendant of Aulus Plautius, the distinguished general who led Emperor Claudius's significant invasion of Britain in 43 AD, laying the foundations for Roman rule on the island. Young Lucius's life took a sharp, unexpected turn when he was barely 6 years old. In 136 AD, an event occurred that forever altered his destiny. His father was adopted by the reigning Emperor Hadrian, officially designating him as the imperial successor. Overnight, little Lucius found himself in the spotlight, under the intense scrutiny of all Roman society. At this moment, many already saw him not merely as a son, but as a potential future heir to the imperial throne, destined to ascend after his father's reign. However, these promising forecasts and hopes for a great future collapsed suddenly, like a house of cards. The tragic and utterly unforeseen death of Lucius's father on January 24, 138 AD, at the age of just 36, cut short all such assumptions. It seemed as though young Lucius's story was destined to end there, on that sorrowful note. Without a father who was predestined to be the next emperor, what chances remained for Lucius himself? In the ruthless world of Roman politics, where the struggle for power knew no mercy, a pertinent question arose: would he now simply be eliminated to prevent any future threat or claim to the imperial throne? His fate hung by a thread, and it appeared his path to greatness was irrevocably severed. Yet, Hadrian, possessing a keen foresight, recognized something significant in the young boy, and when it came time to choose his new successor, the choice fell upon Antoninus Pius. This decision came with an indispensable condition: Antoninus, in turn, was to adopt not only young Lucius but also another young man for whom Hadrian seemingly harbored a special affection, Marcus. This momentous adoption was later immortalized on a monument erected in Ephesus in Lucius's honor after his death. On the left side of the composition, Marcus Aurelius is depicted as a young man with characteristic curly hair. Beside him stands their new father, Antoninus Pius, tenderly embracing young Lucius, and on the far right of the monumental scene stands the figure of Hadrian. From this point on, Lucius became known as Lucius Aelius Aurelius Commodus, while Marcus changed his name to Marcus Aelius Aurelius Verus, now universally referred to as Marcus Aurelius. By the end of his reign, Hadrian was afflicted by an illness, and he dedicated most of his time entirely to ensuring the continuity of imperial power. This crucial mission was by then successfully completed. He had not only a loyal and reliable heir who strictly followed his political course in Antoninus Pius, but also 2 young Caesars in reserve, should the empire's needs require their ascension. Thus, the imperial throne was securely guaranteed for the foreseeable future. Was it Hadrian's actual intention for Lucius and Marcus to jointly govern the empire? Precise information on this matter has not been preserved, but Marcus's subsequent actions and decisions suggest that such a prospect could well have been part of the plan. One fact remains undeniable: they shared a deep mutual affection. Marcus, being the elder, took young Lucius under his patronage, guiding him and offering support. Both had experienced the loss of their fathers at an early age, and this shared tragic experience likely strengthened their bond even further. Historical sources indicate that Antoninus showed clear favoritism towards Marcus, preferring him over Lucius. Perhaps he found a kindred spirit in Marcus, a person close in spirit and worldview, or perhaps the boys were simply perceived differently due to the significant age difference. Marcus was almost 10 years Lucius's senior. Another circumstance that might have influenced this dynamic is the fact that Hadrian had insisted on Lucius's betrothal to Antoninus's daughter, Aeneia Galeria Faustina. However, Antoninus subsequently broke off this engagement to marry Faustina to Marcus instead. And although Lucius and Faustina were closer in age, in the eyes of Roman society, Marcus, being older, appeared to be a more natural and suitable match for Faustina. Remarkably, more information about Lucius's teachers has been preserved than about the mentors of most other emperors. The Historia Augusta contains a detailed list of Lucius's mentors, distinguished individuals whom his adoptive father likely considered leaders and recognized authorities in their respective fields. This was a multifaceted group of experts, gathered from all corners of the vast empire, a reader from Alexandria, Egypt, a historian who arrived from Pergamum in Asia Minor, a skilled jurist from Numidia, and the son of one of Hadrian's personal grammarians, Scarinus, who lived long enough to teach the future emperor Severus Alexander. In addition to them, many other grammarians and philosophers contributed to young Lucius's education, ensuring his deep and comprehensive development. His entry into public life occurred in 153 AD when he assumed the duties of quaestor. During his quaestorship, he organized and held gladiatorial games in magnificent Rome, occupying a place of honor between two prominent figures of the time, Antoninus and Marcus Aurelius, which undoubtedly underscored his growing influence and significance. Already in the following year, 154 AD, at the age of just 24, he attained the high position of consul, demonstrating rapid career advancement. After Antoninus's death on March 7, 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius ascended the imperial throne and immediately recognized Lucius as his co-ruler, thus initiating a unique period in the history of the Roman Empire. Historians still differ on whether this step was pre-planned by Hadrian before his death, or if it was an innovative decision by Marcus himself. There is a hypothesis that Hadrian might have envisioned Marcus as the senior Augustus and Lucius as his junior Caesar. However, to leave no doubt about their complete equality, both rulers adopted the titles of Caesar and Augustus, clearly denoting their joint status. The adoptive brothers were known to be very close, and some believe that Lucius's appointment as co-emperor was a direct result of their strong bond. Nevertheless, it is not excluded that Marcus was prompted to such a significant step by more pragmatic considerations. One possible reason could have been Marcus's desire, by elevating Lucius to equal status, to restrain him from undesirable actions and prevent any potential future attempts at usurping power, thereby ensuring stability and continuity. Another important reason might have been that Marcus Aurelius, who valued philosophical pursuits above all else and did not consider himself a great military commander, which is ironic, given the subsequent years of his reign, wished to delegate military affairs to Lucius. The abridged work of Cassius Dio attests that Lucius, on the contrary, was a very energetic person in his youth and possessed the necessary qualities for leading military campaigns. This is why Marcus solidified their alliance by marrying his daughter Lucilla to Lucius and sent him to lead the war against the powerful Parthians. Of course, it should not be forgotten that this could have been Hadrian's original plan, and Marcus Aurelius merely honored the memory of his adoptive grandfather. It is probable that both practical and personal motives guided Marcus's decision. In any case, from this moment, they both became full-fledged emperors of Rome. Soldiers of the Roman Empire, especially the elite units of the Praetorian Guard, traditionally expected generous donatives upon the accession of a new emperor. Of the two newly inaugurated rulers, Lucius Verus was chosen for the important mission of addressing the Praetorian Guard and the rest of the troops. Although both Lucius and Marcus Aurelius possessed outstanding oratorical skills, the selection of Lucius for this task did not go unnoticed and was perceived as a very remarkable sign. Marcus Aurelius later in his life, in a letter addressed to his tutor Fronto, would once again note his adoptive brother's eloquence. Upon ascending the imperial throne, Lucius Verus underwent another name change, now adopting the appellation Imperator Caesar Lucius Aurelius Verus Augustus. In the same year, 161 AD, Marcus Aurelius's second son was born, whom he named Commodus, thereby paying homage to his adoptive brother. Interestingly, Lucius Verus was born with this cognomen. the Eastern Front always remained a zone of tension. The Armenian kingdom, situated between powerful Rome and Parthia, served as a buffer zone and played a strategically crucial role in the complex Roman-Parthian relations. Both great powers invariably sought to establish their protectorate over Armenia and did not hesitate to resort to military action to achieve this goal. The overwhelming majority of conflicts between Rome and Parthia throughout history were precisely caused by the struggle for control over Armenia and each side's desire to secure a dominant position in the internal politics of this borderland buffer state. At the very moment Lucius and Marcus had just established themselves at the helm of the Roman Empire, a serious crisis erupted on the eastern frontiers. Parthian troops treacherously invaded Armenian territory. Their objective was clear and pragmatic: to depose the pro-Roman king and install a puppet ruler whose interests would be entirely aligned with Parthian ones. It is highly probable that this aggressive action was a direct and immediate reaction to the recent change in supreme power in Rome. The Parthians, apparently, harbored hopes for a weakening of imperial might after the death of a ruler whose reign lasted over 2 decades, and decided to exploit what they perceived as a moment of vulnerability. Roman general Sidatius Severianus, commanding troops in Cappadocia, hastened to meet the invasion. He attempted to invade Armenia to seize the initiative from the enemy, but his campaign turned into a tragedy. Severianus found himself besieged at Elegia, suffered catastrophic losses, losing an entire legion, and ultimately, unable to bear the shame and hopelessness, committed suicide. After such a resounding success in Armenia, where the Parthians firmly established their dominance, they did not delay and swiftly moved further south, targeting the rich and strategically important Roman province of Syria. The province of Syria, incidentally, was at that time considered one of the most prestigious and influential territories a Roman senator could govern. At that critical moment, its governor was Titus Cornelius, who, realizing the gravity of the situation, immediately advanced his 2 legions to confront the Parthian invaders. However, despite his resolve, Cornelius suffered a crushing defeat, which effectively opened the empire's eastern borders for further enemy incursions. News of this catastrophic development likely reached Rome by 162 AD, and Lucius was chosen to lead the retaliatory military campaign. Both emperors, Lucius and Marcus, journeyed to southern Italy, intending to sail from the port of Brundisium. Marcus, demonstrating brotherly support, accompanied his co-ruler as far as Capua, after which he returned to the capital. However, upon reaching Canusium, Lucius suddenly and severely fell ill. Learning of this, Marcus immediately rushed back to his brother's side. Some sources that have come down to us claim that the illness was caused by Lucius's excessive and rather dissolute lifestyle. Nevertheless, an important historical question arises concerning this first serious bout of illness. Was it a harbinger of the very ailment that would claim his life several years later, or was it a completely separate, unrelated malady? Unfortunately, the information available to us is too scarce to provide a definitive answer. Lucius Verus, having recovered from his illness, resumed his journey to the east, crossing the seas from Brundisium to reach Greece. There, he made stops in historically significant cities such as Corinth and Athens before proceeding further into Anatolia. In Asia Minor, his path primarily followed the coast, allowing him to visit numerous important settlements. Some historical chronicles attest that Lucius's progress to Syria took an unusually long time, and this unhurried movement was attributed, in their view, to the emperor's excessively free lifestyle. However, one must consider the circumstances he was in. The Roman command needed to transfer significant military contingents from the Danubian frontier to reinforce the empire's eastern borders. Such reinforcements, even under the most favorable conditions, would only arrive at their destination by the end of the active military season. Considering a hypothetical scenario, if Parthian forces had invaded Armenia immediately after news of Emperor Antoninus Pius's death reached them, which occurred in March 161 AD, it would likely have taken approximately 1 month for that news to reach Parthia. And it would have taken another month for information about the Parthian invasion itself to reach the imperial capital, Rome. Thus, the earliest receipt of this intelligence in Rome could not have occurred before May. The process of alerting the legions stationed along the Danube would have required approximately another month, pushing the start of their movement to June. The military units had to cover a considerable distance, around 2,000 kilometers, beginning their journey from the Moesian provinces to reach the presumed theater of war. Under the most optimistic scenario, their arrival in Syria could not have been expected before August. Consequently, real military intervention in Armenia, aimed at changing the situation, seemed impossible before the onset of the next military season. Traditionally, the active period for Roman military campaigns spanned from March 23 to October 19. Some historians might argue that Lucius Verus should have arrived in Syria as soon as possible to attempt to stabilize the overall situation in the region. However, given the absence of substantial military contingents capable of providing reliable protection for the emperor, and taking into account the active operations of the Parthian army in that territory, such a decision would have been an extremely risky and unjustified undertaking. Upon the arrival of Lucius Verus and his reinforcements on Syrian soil, the Strategic Command planned two large-scale military operations. One expeditionary force was aimed north, towards Armenia, with the ultimate objective of reaching and capturing Artaxata, which served as the Armenian capital. Meanwhile, the Second Army was to cross through Osroene, penetrating directly into Parthian territory. It should be noted that the Syrian legions were in a deplorable state long before they suffered defeat at the hands of the Parthian forces. Rumors circulated that the soldiers spent far more time in roadside taverns than on training grounds or in formation. To rectify this situation, Lucius Verus personally conducted thorough inspections of each military unit, generously rewarding those who demonstrated valor and diligence, so that their example might inspire others and contribute to the restoration of strict military discipline. The morale of the Syrian contingents was extremely low after the recent fiasco, but Lucius skillfully directed them to participate in local skirmishes and minor battles where victory was almost guaranteed. This allowed them to gradually build confidence in their own abilities, preparing them for the upcoming large-scale military operations. By the time Lucius arrived, Rome had already suffered two significant defeats from Parthian forces. Nevertheless, the Roman Empire possessed one undeniable superiority over the Parthian kingdom. Although the Parthians were capable of mobilizing impressively numerous armies, their military power was feudal in nature, making it most effective when confronting only one opponent at a time.